what that kind of campaign that was launched by LTHT meant was it's really helped to kind of galvanise the wider health system to go a bit further and faster. Quite a bit of progress had been made in the different organisations, albeit to a differing extent. But it was very much a drip feed and a slow. And if anything, it was more a consequence of the improvements in other areas of technology rather than a particular drive and a particular awareness about the concerns around faxing and the kind of alternative solutions. So, as Richard's mentioned, we have quite a mature electronic health system sharing the records across, and that's really enabled quite a lot of information to be passed that way rather than the sort of old school faxing. We also have widespread use and increasing use of electronic referral systems and gradually kind of going up to cover every referral across the system, which again has made quite a lot of help from that point of view. One of the kind of key messages, particularly from sort of looking around the community, is that faxing is a two-way process. And it sounds obvious, but actually that's been one of the biggest challenges, particularly where and a lot of GPs, the communication is with people outside of the NHS. And so we need to understand the alternative solutions and be comfortable that they do provide a safe alternative while also acknowledging the risks of the incumbent process. So I'm going to talk to you about sort of the three main different providers within Leeds, and starting with general practice, which in itself isn't a single provider. It's obviously multiple different small businesses working in different ways, and one of the challenges here has been that it's not something that can be organised. There's 100 practices as of press today in Leeds, and they all operate differently with different workflows, and there's not one team at the moment, although they're working much better together, that can deliver a kind of scheme to reduce that fax. But what we have done is tried to share some of the learning between us, looking at where we're using faxes and what we can do. And actually, due to that developments over the years, the improved referral processes, we're actually sending very little outgoing. So there was some outgoing faxes going out to insurance companies and some small numbers to secondary care. These tended to be ad hoc faxes to consultants chasing up other referrals rather than the original information themselves. But our incoming use of fax machines is quite wide, covering everything from pharmacies and care homes to actually a lot of the community services, secondary care and insurance companies. And so in order to kind of change that, we've had to look at how we're going to offer alternative solutions. So we've then also sort of worked with the other provider in the community, the other sort of community healthcare provider, who actually have been doing relatively good progress over the many years, but they have multiple services and departments, often which work relatively siloed. So some of which have actually celebrated going fax-free even a couple of years ago in some cases, whereas others are completely and utterly reliant on the fax machine, as they don't seem to use electronic health records consistently or confidently, and so don't have viable alternatives at this point. The Mental Health Trust is an interesting case in Leeds, in that one of their biggest challenges has just been getting a lot of their clinicians to even use clinical systems, and this provides quite a barrier where they're recording lots and lots of things on paper. Getting the communication through alternative means is a bit more tricky. They're actually migrating to a new clinical system this year and seeing that as a huge opportunity, obviously beyond faxing, but to get all their clinicians and their staff to try and use the digital solutions and the benefits from that point of view much more widely. And as part of that, they intend to migrate their workflows, as they design new ones, away from the fax machine again to axe the fax, although, as Richard says, the kind of caveat there is that there will be some element of business continuity. So there may be a few redundant faxes sitting next to our old analog phones, which are ready to be plugged in if needed. So obviously, as part of that, talking through, and as Richard's highlighted, there's lots of different ways that we can look at those other workflows. And the ideal ones are through sharing the information directly through clinical systems where it's for direct care. But outside of that, it's understanding what the alternative options are. In the UK, using NHSnet emails, as long as it's going to and from the same or to a government email, is considered secure. But with some of the insurance companies and people outside that solution, we're not confident in their security of their email network. And so while sometimes you can use, or we use, encrypted email systems, but they're a bit of a faff, and which is the technical description, and also, as there's such a large number of staff across different places using this and using them very occasionally, actually the training and support to do that often doesn't work so well. And people have actually resorted to post in many cases, tracking it for large records and various things. As I mentioned, the e-referrals and other ways of communicating between the providers has been quite a big kind of move forward here. You'll notice one of the things that's not in ours, particularly from GP, is identifying the fax machines, because actually there's one per practice site in most cases. The community trust did have has had a bit more to do on some of that, and again with the mental health trust, but it's not quite so widespread. They're not quite so widely spread out and used. Now, there is eFax down there as an option, although it's not. It has been used for a few of our providers where the solutions come in onto a fax machine but are never printed out and they're sent via electronic email. But it's considered a bit more of a stopgap message, because we would rather not be sending them out, and often they're returned via the same system but to the fax machine of the host, and we would like to avoid that because of the security concerns that come with it. So kind of what I've tried to do is that while it hasn't been even though there has been the Axe the Fax campaign and the Leeds organisations have really stepped up, there hasn't been an absolute clear driven plan coordinated across the entire system. But that's because of the challenges with those workflows. There has been a very clear drive and commitment by all organisations to reduce and remove their fax machines at an appropriate time. But the key messages and the key things coming out is that the workflows to do that need to work for frontline staff. They need to make sense for the people using it, and it needs to be more effective. But equally, as part of that, what we've discovered is that actually we can work in, as Rich put, more productive ways, more effective ways by doing that. And it's training people to use those digital solutions, which they then find there are other options and uses for, and other benefits that come with it, not least encouraging the use of the electronic health record, the Leeds Care record that we have. As mentioned, we've used the Axe the Fax toolkit, and that talks very much about how obviously one of the key things is to get rid of the fax number from all your communications, as well as communicating out the alternative solutions and how we're going to talk from now going forwards. We also found that with organisations in the community that couldn't or that weren't directly within sort of our areas, such as pharmacies and care homes, it was our role really to support them. They often didn't have any teams or any management within that could look to do this. So we've provided our pharmacies and helped them get NHS email addresses, working with our community teams at better ways to communicate, looking at the care homes to do the same. And then the other key message is just once you've done it, it's very easy to kind of monitor. You need to make sure you are managing any faxes that come in, but having a protocol to how you respond and keep at it and get everybody committed.
Great, thanks so much, Alistair. So we'll open up now for some questions. As I said before, if you just put your role and organisation before your question in the chat box, then we can make sure that they are answered for you. But I think we've already got one that's just come in from Louise Wall, who's a healthcare consultant. This one's specifically for Richard. She says she's keen to understand if there's any national funding available for this campaign. Might be one for Matt Hancock. And also, how did you use your MFDs as part of the move away from traditional fax machines?
So I guess first and foremost around funding, I've not seen that there's any national funding being put in across the NHS for the removal of fax machines from across the system. I think one of the things that we've done is understand quite clearly, and there's details of this in the toolkit, understand the actual cost of the fax machine and the full details of that cost by trying to work through very specifically the detail around both the telephone lines, the paper, and the human time of actually taking faxes and then putting them into electronic health records. I guess one of the things that we've got to be aware of when we're looking at the cost of a fax is it's not just the piece of paper, the ink, and the telephone line, but also the fact that that piece of information isn't available to the next person delivering care so easily. I think that's really important that we start to understand how we do that and where we take that across the different trusts. The MFDs part as a move away from traditional fax machines, what we've used is the managed print service, our electronic health record, and making sure that's available. We've used secure email as Alistair talked about there by using NHS Mail. We've used the Forward app and other instant messaging solutions that are available as part of securely communicating across the NHS. And they're the ones that we've focused on as far as tools that are in place. We've also got fax to digital gateways in place across Leeds as well, so we can start to completely remove the fax from that. And indeed, our managed print solution has that capability as part of it. Alistair, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I guess I would. And actually, coming as a GP, where normally I would argue, because we do so much unfunded work, but I would be arguing for everything to be funded. But actually, the whole principle of accessing the fax is not simply replacing it with something else that would bring in a cost, but it is, as Richard said, some of those initial cost savings, just potentially removing phone lines and just that time taken for the workflow. But actually, if that's the only reason you're doing it, then I think there's a big question as to your priorities there and also the approach you're taking. Because as Richard alluded to there, with the fact that they're not available for the next person and various things like that, what we found is that in the alternatives, the actual enhancement to productivity and workflow and to other offshoot pieces of information, like pushing people to a healthcare record and seeing stuff they didn't realise they could get access to help them care for people, has been quite significant. So I would absolutely see it as a good business development that increases your productivity, and the cost to actually do it is relatively minimal. I can pick up the next question if you want as well.
That would be great, Alistair.
They're flying through them now.
Just for those who aren't following the chat, the next question was from Tracy White from Solent NHS Trust, who's the ICT Service Engagement. She asked, can care homes have an NHS net account as well as pharmacies?
So I can answer this to a degree, although I'm certainly not any authority within it. It would depend on the nature, as I understand it, of the care home and the services they're providing, in terms of certainly those that are NHS organisations should be entitled to one. But even that comes with a caveat that many of them don't use computers to do all of their records. While that is definitely developing, there is a challenge there. But I don't believe all of the care homes, so certainly the private provider ones, even if they are providing NHS services, are definitely entitled to. I'd be happy to be corrected, but yeah, we haven't been given information as to how we can help them get them, but pharmacies can.
I think, so to add to that, Sarah, Alistair, I believe you're right. As a private healthcare, I think there's a process to step through, but it's not as straightforward as just getting access to it. Yeah. And then if you look a bit further down, Vic Rayner from the National Care Forums asked a similar question around practical tips to support care homes getting access to removing the fax. I guess one of the things that we focused in Leeds in 2019 will be mobile access to the Leeds Care Record and our electronic health record. If we can place secure and appropriate access to the EHR in the care home, then we can use that to share information more appropriately and in a way that we can actually monitor who's using that. I think that's been really powerful for us in Leeds as we start to do that in 2019, to look at the whole health and social care system having access to the EHR, which has been really important.
Yeah, but I'm building on. I mean, within Leeds, the care homes are quite a big focus, as obviously they're people with quite significant health needs. We talk about care homes as one, and it probably is important to differentiate between those care homes with nursing or significant mental health issues, as opposed to the residential. And it tends to be where we're looking at is those nursing care homes, because actually at the moment, without access to the EHR, there's an argument that compared to housebound patients, they're discriminated against or sort of disadvantaged. We're also looking though with other schemes at how do we support them to get technology in there, and so that doctors attending and other care teams attending to work within the care home have access to that. So we're looking at getting Wi-Fi in, making sure they're connected up for fibre, and as part of that, it is absolutely looking to see how we can support them to get things such as the NHS net, or certainly some form of secure email.
Thanks, guys. I think there's a follow-up question, which you more or less just answered, but it was from Vic Rayner from the National Care Forum, and this is for Alistair. He was asking again about what you found was the most successful thing to do to support care homes, to get them to a place where they're able to respond securely. So any tips to support in addition to what you said? I
think it's probably true for all of the biggest factor was a relationship, and actually just going out, talking to the right people involved and getting their buy-in and understanding why. Particularly for general practice, it's often less of a challenge because geographically we're relatively close. So sometimes we're on the doorstep. So there are alternative ways. but it was also about an education that had been going on. A lot of their uses for fax were inappropriate and unsafe. So simple requests that somebody was ill and various things where the fax could be left unattended for a while, and actually moving to more appropriate two-way forms of communication like telephone. But then also looking at supporting them with other ways of requesting medication, either through pharmacies, direct, through email, that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. And question for Richard. So how was it done in terms of getting rid of your fax machines? Were they all switched off on the same day? The question.
No, absolutely not. I think that plays back to that engagement piece. So to get out, find the faxes, find who's using them, and in particular what for. So what's the most common use of the fax machine in the department, on the ward, in the different situation, and then work with that part of the healthcare system to look for the replacement. Trying to just turn everything off on one day just becomes a little bit like Alistair was alluding to there, just almost a bit of a numbers game rather than actually trying to improve what we deliver through that information. So we've tried really hard to make sure it's an understanding of, firstly, where are the fax machines, then what are they used for, and then how do we replace them with something better. And that's a big part of the engagement. That's why reliance on the CCIOs and the digital champions is so big for us.
And follow up to that again, Richard. So how are you dealing with reaching organisations who are insisting on keeping their fax machines, at least temporarily? And I guess if the organisation itself, in terms of the acute trust, in some parts is using fax and in other parts has started to get rid of fax, how are you enabling those to still communicate?
So that fax gateway piece is a big part of that. So being able to say, well, okay, if you insist on continuing to use faxes, then that's how you communicate with us. But we have a way now of being able to take a fax into a digital solution and then onwards to be copied into our EHR or put and used as part of an email service. So we've implemented that in a big way across LTHT to make sure we have that. The other parts to that, though, is understanding why the fax needs to be retained. And again, it comes back to that benefit piece. Is we need to be really clear that we're not taking faxes out for the sheer hell of it, or because Matt Hancock stood up and said you must get rid of faxes, but because we want to get the benefit of having that integrated healthcare information and sharing information that's been collated once in a way that can be truly part of a record rather than a scanned piece of paper behind a piece of glass. So it's understanding why people would want to keep the fax and keep that working.
Okay. So we've got time for probably 2 more questions before we start to wrap up. We've got one from Charles McKinnon, who has asked, how do we develop better leadership for a social movement for digital services across multiple stakeholder organisations? He says, CHC crosses many organisations and innovative digital services which are better for families and very difficult to deliver. He said he needs some help and there are lots of faxes still at the bedrock of CHC.
I think, isn't it fascinating that this has become the first time we really truly have started to talk about a social movement? And I wonder if that's a little bit because nobody mandated that we did it, we just started doing it, and it grew in its own way as far as engaging people. I think the things that we've learned in LTHT and across Leeds working with Alistair is that it's that common purpose piece that we've described quite simply why and what we're trying to do in removing the fax. And then we've gone to a place where we've been able to engage and work together. We've taken out that doing it because it's a target, doing it because it's technology, and made it more about how do we join up the health and social care capability across Leeds. I mean, when we look at December 2018, we had 92 million interactions with our electronic health record across Leeds as a community, Leeds as a platform. The CIO of Leeds as a city and of the CCG talks about Leeds no longer being separate healthcare silos, but as a platform for delivering healthcare to the citizens of Leeds. So we've even taken away the word patient from there and started to talk about the people who live in Leeds and how do we join up to give a health and social care environment that can ultimately serve those people. And I think that's become a big part of where we've got to. I think using the fax as a way to coalesce those people and bring them together has been a big part of that. You know, the fact that we have clinicians like Alistair, other CCIOs across the system who are driving forward this, not because Matt Hancock said we must remove faxes, but because as clinicians they can see the benefit in having access to that information, has turned it into something that's been, you know, way bigger than it needed to be in some ways from the point of view of the movement it is, but it's given people something to really hook onto and understand how we can work together in a different way.
Yeah. So I think absolutely, and I think it's also a process, and it's important that we don't almost talk about this as digital in an interesting way, in that what we're trying to do is work with people on the front line. There is definitely something about overcoming fear. Fear, people don't like change done to them, but they're happy to often be involved in the change. But it's about understanding what it is they do and what we might be able to do through this, how they could do things differently to improve. And that often starts with giving them confidence with just one or two simple things. And one thing that's really interesting around the Leeds Care Record work that we've done is how the number of uses is still increasing, even when the number of users is only very slowly growing at this point because it's almost saturated. But those people are using it more and more and more and finding the benefits every day. And I think the same, looking at this from the facts point of view, actually it's about the normal kind of system change and leadership work that you'd want to do. So finding those people who are going to lead fast, finding the enthusiastic ones with the energy, but then sharing that with others, understanding the issues and the challenges of the people around the system and connecting. So one of the things we've done in Leeds is, I'm trying not to sound too egotistical from this, is me, but I don't mean me as an individual. I mean the fact that I work in the city digital team, which is connected across the city. So I was employed into that because other people, Richard included, were integral in sort of setting that up as a concept, working across the different providers and the commissioners across the city, so that we have that commitment. We have a lot of joint organisations now trying to do the agenda, joint sort of boards, I should say, separate from the organisation, so that we can enable the working together, and that leadership trickles down so that we encourage people on the front line to work across those traditional boundaries and deliver that, putting people at the centre of it.
Thanks both. And final question, I think, for today, again from Tracy White from Solent, and she's asking, is it acceptable to keep a redundant fax machine with our emergency analogue lines in the event of an emergency? I know from an NHS England perspective, because I've asked the same question in our talks with them, they have said that for business continuity or emergency situations, one or two fax machines are going to be allowed, if you like. But you guys, Richard, Alistair, do you have a final take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've said right from the very beginning that as far as Silver Command being able to create a capability, should we not be able to rely on other solutions, then a fax machine is that robust, we consider bomb-proof to some degree solution to be able to wheel out and use as a way of communicating. I think that will change over the next couple of years as we start to see more robust ways of moving away, but that's what we're doing, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think across the community providers we would absolutely have the same, and even like I mentioned, the CCG will have one somewhere, maybe a small one in a cupboard. In actual general practices, most of them are our photocopiers, so we would. It's not a case of actually throwing that away. Firstly, it's way too big, but also the reality is we'd have it there, but we will just have effectively turned it off. Other than for that business continuity situation, it would be about third or fourth route down, because we actually have quite a number of different things to take through business continuity, not least 4G mobile laptops, which are constantly charged, with clinical systems that still operate on a saved model from the night before. So yeah, they have a role to be there as a backup for now, but I don't think it's for long.
Great. And I've got to ask this question, just one sentence from you both. Matt Hancock's deadline for April 2020 for removal of all fax machines. Do you think the deadline will be hit? Yes.
I do.
Yeah,
I think it's one of those targets.
So I think if it was April 2020, I think effectively, but I think there might be a few tricklers around, not particularly in general practice, but in some of the smaller community providers.
Great.
But I'd be pleased to be wrong.
So yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We're just about out of time. I know it's Friday afternoon and everyone wants to get off and also try and get ahead of the snow. So safe travels, everyone. The recording will be sent to everyone by email, so just you can share it as much as you like, share it by social media.
28
and also we're looking
gone.
for ideas of how we can enhance the toolkit and create a second version. So if anyone wants to let us know what they want to hear in the second edition, then please email us or tweet using the Access hashtag.
12
so
has
thanks
gone.
so much for joining. Goodbye.